on our agenda today, Suddenplant?
Well, today we are going to visit a place that is very important to the Paratrooper and I, because it is the place where we both attended college. I am, of course, speaking of Kutztown University. Yep, Paratrooper and I both went there. I started there in the fall of 2004. He actually started earlier in the fall of 2003. It wasn't his first college. He went to his local community college for a couple of years first, and then he went over to Kutztown. I went there right after high school, and it's meaningful to us for a number of reasons. Well, first of all, obviously it's where the 3 very important years of our lives were both spent. Furthermore, it's also the place where we met each other. Yep.
Yeah.
Now get this, we were put together as roommates randomly. I needed a dorm room, he needed a dorm room. We didn't really have anyone we wanted to sign up with, so they just, randomly said, oh, you're going to be with a person called Brian Swank. And I'm like, okay, that's good, I guess. And
didn't your girlfriend at the time, Julie, say to you, Brian Swank, maybe I've heard that name before?
I think so. I think she might have said something like that. And then I'm like, oh man, what's this guy going to be like? Because I was 19 at the time, and I didn't like the immaturity that I saw around me. And I'm like, oh man, I felt like I'm going to be some freshman. Well, not only did I not get a freshman, but I probably got the oldest guy in the dorm by like 2 years.
You're right.
And, I'm pretty sure Brian was worrying the same thing, that he was going to get an immature, underclassman who was just going to be obnoxious. Well, he did get somebody who was younger. I was 19. He was almost 23 at the time. And, but he got me. And, for the first half of the year, I was not around that much because I actually spent almost all my nights at my girlfriend's on-campus apartment, which is located in a different part of the campus.
And during that time period, when I would go home and visit the family, and all the family was asking me, "How's your new roommate?" I actually at one point told them, "What roommate?"
Yeah, it's like you had none.
Yeah.
And well, around Christmas time, the holiday season, when 2006 started, things started to change. My relationship with my girlfriend at the time became not as good. Also, she moved, and the place where she moved to, there were a lot of neighbors, that were being nosy and things. So, it contributed to me spending a lot fewer nights at her apartment, and so I started to spend the majority of my nights at, the dorm that my parents were kind enough to pay for and I was not using. I was a bit of a dick when I was 19, but anyway, I spent more time in this dorm with Brian, and things started to change. Like, at first we didn't really talk to each other too much, and I'm sure Brian was maybe a tad resentful that he no longer had the room entirely to himself. But then what happened was we found we had a common interest in a similar taste of music. And then the magic happened. One day, Brian was out of town. He was visiting his parents, or maybe at the mall or whatever. And I looked over on his desk, and I saw a CD sitting here. And the CD said, Genesis, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. So I said, this sounds interesting. So I put it in, and from that moment, that instant, within the first listening, I was instantly sold to Genesis forever. They were my band forever and ever and ever. And it also happened to be Brian's favorite band, and we just became huge Genesis fans together. And that was sort of the beginning of our bonding. We bonded over this one band, Genesis.
And it's like, for the first, year and a half of our friendship, it's like all we talked about was Genesis.
Yeah, Genesis, and to an extent other music. But then, after we, sometimes, friendships built on one thing will not last. But then we started to branch out and found that we had more in common. And then it turned out that we had tons in common. And these days, we rarely even talk about Genesis or any, thing like that,
Yeah, we don't really talk about music as much anymore.
Maybe, maybe give it a mention here and there, but, it's not like a topic of constant discussion as it once was.
Right.
And, it's part of an evolution of a friendship. But, anyway, getting back on the topic of Kutztown, that's where we're going today. It's very memorable. I feel, even though I'm not a religious person whatsoever, and everyone knows that, I'm not even really a spiritual person, but I still feel that Kutztown is a sacred place, you have places where you walk on, in a place and you're like, this is sacred ground. That's how I feel about Kutztown. It's sacred ground. And I even call it the Holy City sometimes, because that's how sacred I feel it is to me. And the only other city I've been to that feels that way is Gettysburg, incidentally where my sister went to college. But that was a little different because that was, paid for in blood. Kutztown, no battle was fought there or anything. But it was my own blood, not literally. Well, maybe a little bit, I might have banged my arm on the desk or something in the 3 years I lived there, but, my blood, sweat, and tears were spent living in Kutztown. It was a very memorable 3 years. My life was changed beyond all belief, for better and for worse, within those 3 years.
I would say mine too.
Yeah. So this really is a place that is very important to us, and
so even nowadays, I don't really think I didn't get what I expected to get out of a Kutztown, but I got something else that you can't find, in any classroom. A good friend.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like the things we got in the classroom at Kutztown were maybe the least of our, of what we got. The more intangible things, like not what you learned in the classroom, but the friends you made and the experiences you had were the things that I really took with me from Kutztown. And it's a beautiful thing. And also it remained important to us in the years following, because it happened to be the halfway point between Newtown, where I used to live, and Sunbury, where Brian used to live. So we would always meet in Kutztown, once every few months, and we met there for several years after that. And, it continued to be a place where we talked about, important things to us. It continued being a holy city. And now, even though we live in the same place, which is at least 60 miles away from Kutztown, we still visit there because it still has that importance to us. And hopefully we'll be able to show some of it to you today, even though this camera's acting all screwy.